Welcome everyone. Great to have you join ORT for this webinar this morning. For those of you who are new to ORT, we are an organization that supports entrepreneurs in the Jewish community through mentorship, networking, and training. If you'd like to know more, please contact Brenna or me. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Dvorah Stein. Dvorah is a people and culture strategist and coach. She is the founder of The Hive and a faculty member of Integral Africa's Coaching Center and the Elliott Osren Leadership Institute. The Hive works with individuals, teams, and organizations to enhance their way of well-being and working through high-impact coaching, culture, and leadership programs. Thank you to the Elliott Osren Leadership Institute for introducing us to Dvorah and planting the seed for this webinar. A reminder to please keep your microphones on mute. Please feel free to post comments and questions in the chat box. Dvorah, thank you for giving of your time and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa and Brenna. Thank you for having me today. It's a real honor to be here, and yeah, I'm amazed by the incredible work that ORT is doing in the community and beyond the community. So yeah, thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to just share my screen and we're going to dive straight in. Okay, so while we might have another couple people popping onto the call as we go, I'd like for you just to have a look at this image that you're seeing on the screen now. And in the chat box, share any insights that come up for you and how you're making meaning of the image that's on the screen at the moment. So we'll just give that a couple moments. Yeah, absolutely. So the bubble, hypochondriacs, and I think everyone's different views on how things are going with COVID and our stance on it, and how safe are we, how unsafe are we, yeah, the level of engagement, and do we want to connect, are we missing that engagement? Yeah, Neil saying living in isolation, and what does togetherness mean? So when I saw this image, it really got me thinking, and yeah, on the topic of conversational intelligence and why it's become so important for us. So yeah, Natalie's saying here around blocking the way that we communicate, and what is that block? I think we've all had the experience of technology and how that's shifted how we've had to operate and how we've had to navigate conversations. So we're going to dive into the session, and I'm going to share with you our roadmap for today. It's just, there we go. In terms of today's session, Lisa did mention that it's an interactive session. So whilst we're not going to be talking or going into breakaways, I definitely would love you to share your comments or questions. It's not popping up in the chat in front of me, but I am going to have an opportunity at the end of the session to go have a look at those questions and to talk to all of you guys and hopefully get through all of those questions. And for those that we don't manage to get to in the session, we will yeah, definitely pick up a conversation afterwards. So today we're going to talk about why conversational intelligence. We're going to be exploring a little bit about the neuroscience of conversations and some of the latest research on the topic. We'll be looking at CIQ and an essential toolkit. So just hopefully taking some practical tools away from today as well. And then finally, as I mentioned, a Q&A. So why conversational intelligence? Why is this important to us right now? I think some of you have alluded to it in the comments already, but we've been catalyzed into immense change, and our world's kind of gone instantaneously digital. And for many of us, that means our communication channels and the way that we're engaging with the world and with our families, with our friends, with our organizations and teams has completely changed. For a lot of us, for me certainly, for my husband as well, we're pretty much working remotely. And this really changes the game. Many of us are also experiencing this heightened level of fear, of stress that's associated with our economic, our health crisis that's pretty much affecting all of us, and the socio-political landscape that we're a part of. There's been a lot of impact on careers and certainly on family life, with many of us having to navigate a whole new strategy of juggling. I like to call myself the proverbial juggler as well, because I feel like I'm juggling a whole lot of different roles that in the past were largely compartmentalized. So all of this impacts on the level of stress that we're experiencing, and it can affect each one of us in different ways. On top of that, we're faced with global challenges around race and gender, a lot of conversations that are sparking the need for us to engage in some challenging conversations and tricky ones. And it really requires a different level of skill to have those conversations in a way that's healthy and that allows us to move forward. So what we know is that the narrow view of conversations being information sharing and kind of sharing what's on your mind, or telling people what you know or how you're thinking about things, that has all shifted. And neuroscience is, and also cognitive research is giving us a lot more depth to what conversations are all about. And what we know now is that they have the powerful potential for impact. They're dynamic, and that they're interactive, they're co-creative, possibility for inclusive. They evolve, and they also impact the way that we connect with each other and how we make our decisions and how we influence each other. And this shapes the events in our lives, and it shapes the outcomes of those events. So with our world moving online, we're seeing now more than ever this opportunity to bridge the reality gap between how we see things and how others are seeing the same things. And amidst this context, we're really needing to tap into those conversational skills in a way that's healthy. So I'd like us to just take a moment to watch a short video clip on Judith E. Glass's work on the topic. So she wrote this book, Conversational Intelligence, and she's done decades of research on the topic. And this video just shares a very high-level overview around what it's about. So please also, as we go, feel free to pop any thoughts or insights into the chat.
There are many types of intelligence, from book smarts to street smarts, from intellectual intelligence to emotional intelligence, and each gives us our own unique abilities for personal success. Yet one type of intelligence is universal and different from all the rest. It's something everyone possesses, in plain sight. This intelligence has the game-changing power to strengthen relationships, transform teams, and shape the future of our organizations for mutual success. This universal intelligence is called conversational intelligence. Let me explain. Each of us has 16,000 words each day. Trillions of conversations are taking place around the globe every single second. But just how many of these conversations actually make a difference? 9 out of 10 conversations. Not all conversations are easy, so we avoid them. We talk past each other, we bang heads, or we get addicted to being right and stop listening to what others are really saying. Now, advances in giving us the tools to look inside of our brains while we're having conversations to reveal just what is going on and why. What we are learning is that conversations are not just about words or information, encoded in every stage of trust. And when we speak with each other, significant neurochemical exchanges take place that impact how trusting or distrusting we will be. When we are stuck in distrust, and even destructive exchanges, we activate our fear networks, causing us to withdraw or fight or flee. Yet not all difficult conversations need to cause us to feel threatened from harm. Imagine you could activate your wisdom to discover how to elevate the quality of your conversation in the moment, learn how to gauge your impact, and shift your influence in front of the curve and prime conversations for trust and mutual success.
Great. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you just to reflect on the following question and just to take a few seconds to read the question that's on the screen and to give thought to it. So, how has stress or fear impacted the quality of your interactions? How has stress or fear impacted the quality of your interactions? So just take a moment to think about that. So for yourself, for your family, your colleagues, your team, just to notice that impact and to consider how this has affected the quality of those relationships. And this really brings us to the need for conversational intelligence. So let's talk about how trust, or the lack of it, plays a role in our conversations. And when we look at that, we see that every conversation has a physiological impact. It'll either trigger trust or distrust. And scientists actually discovered this through fMRI scans. That's functional magnetic resonance imaging. I always trip over my words, so I'm glad I got that out this time. But they did phenomenal amounts of research, and they were able to pick up a massive body of knowledge on the topic by doing these fMRI scans. So as we converse, neurochemicals are being released in our brains, and this is making us feel either good or bad, powerful or weak, positive or negative, and certainly energized from that conversation or depleted and drained. So what neuroscience is showing us is that healthy conversations, or unhealthy conversations, should I say, actually literally are releasing hormones into our system. That's cortisol, it's testosterone, it's norepinephrine. And, you know, when I think about this, I have a personal experience of this in a previous work life, where there was a particular person that I interacted with, and no matter what happened, after that interaction, I always felt worse. I always felt somewhat triggered or somewhat doubting my own value or my own ability to contribute. And it was fascinating because when I came across this topic of conversational intelligence, it really landed for me how so much is actually happening on a neurological level, and this impacts us everywhere, actually. So the beauty is that the opposite also exists. So when we're engaging in healthy conversations, we're seeing that there is a release in oxytocin, in dopamine, in serotonin, and this builds trust. It actually makes you feel more energized. There's a number of people I can think of off the bat that I have these kinds of relationships with. Some are on the call today, and it's almost like no matter what happens, when you leave that interaction, you always feel better, you always feel energized, you always feel nourished by that conversation. And that's what's going on in the brain. So the effects that this has on the body and how this impacts on our moods, on our experience of love and bonding, it's real. And this can, to the same effect, also impact on the experience of depression or hopelessness. And this can show up in how we engage socially. The crazy thing is that it can also impact on our appetites, on our sleep patterns, and even our memory. I've got experience as well where actually with the same person, show the negative example that I gave you. In those interactions, I almost seem to lose my words and not be able to actually say what I planned to say. It's just quite remarkable the impact that this can have physiologically. So we're going to talk now a little bit about what's called an amygdala hijack. And an amygdala hijack quite literally shuts down the functioning of the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that helps us to think strategically, creatively, collaboratively. That's where all of that innovative thinking is happening. And when we have an amygdala hijack, our limbic system is kicking in and it literally hijacks that part of the brain. So our thinking shuts down. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you, or I'm going to ask Lisa if she would kindly launch our first poll, which will ask you guys, what is your default reaction when you are triggered? So we've got those 4 primary reactions: fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And we'll all access all of those reactions, but we'll have a tendency to be defaulted to one of them. So Lisa, if you don't mind to share that poll with us, and you guys can just complete that now, and we'll see what comes up. Great, so you should all be seeing the poll now in front of you. Let's see what you guys have to say about that. Got some interesting numbers coming through. 41% of you have voted. Like to see some more? Great. Fantastic. Just another couple moments. Okay. All right, we're going to end the poll in just a few moments. Okay, fantastic. So there we go. You should be seeing the poll results now in front of you, with the majority of us in the room at 50% saying that their default is fight, and then appease, and then we've got some flights and some freeze. And it's interesting because in a recent session I ran on the topic as well, we had a very similar pattern coming through. So it is quite interesting and good to know that, you know, this is a default. And in what instances does this default serve you, the relationship, the other, and when is it not helpful? Fantastic. Lisa, thank you so much for that. So I'm going to just close that down. And in terms of an amygdala hijack, just in the interest of time, I'd like to offer you guys, for anyone that is keen to know more about how to manage that in the moment, there's some fantastic research on the topic, and I'm more than happy to share some techniques after the session. So if you're keen to know, please pop it in the chat and I will send some information to you afterwards. All right, so let's move on. And we are now going to look at what triggers you. So there are 7 universal threats that can cause an amygdala hijack and actually skew the intention that we have, or, you know, the intention of our message and how it lands and the impact of that message. So within 0.7 seconds of an interaction, our brains are primed to gauge whether the person poses a threat or not. Is this person a friend or are they a foe? And the power of our language and how we communicate directly impacts on the level of that threat, and how to the extent to which we get triggered or not. So this acronym explores the different aspects that we're unconsciously looking for when we're engaging in a conversation, and when we're trying to gauge the level of that threat, when we're connecting with another person. So the first one is tone, and that's really how something is being said. So the message can be whatever it is, but if the tone is off, or if it's sarcastic, or if it's conveying the message in a way that does not make us feel like we can trust the person, we'll immediately be triggered. Humiliation, and I think that's whether it's a subtle or overt criticism, that'll trigger shame. Brené Brown has done incredible research on the topic as well, and she speaks about shame, and she speaks about vulnerability, and I highly recommend reading her work. And then the next one is rejection. So this links to our primary need for feeling valued, feeling worthy. And then exclusion, and I think exclusion has been a big one for quite a few of my clients. This has come up as an issue or as a topic recently, where we are in some ways quite disconnected from each other, and that sense of I'm not included can be very triggering. So in a business or organization setting, for those of you who have teams or are leaders or kind of run your own business, important to think about moving from a needs to know basis to a who doesn't know basis, and really paying conscious attention to inclusion. The next one is anger, and aggression will trigger us immediately. That's going to impact us and push us into a self-protect mode. And then territoriality, so when someone knowingly or unknowingly steps on our turf, that's going to come up, and it's going to trigger that sense of threat. And finally, status. And one of my clients was sharing a story with me about a senior or superior to him, and how this person had this habit of banding about her qualifications and her level of expertise and experience, and how important, and all of her accolades. And it was fascinating, because the impact that this had on him, but also on the whole team, was that it was quite intimidating, and it shut people down. So status and the need for kind of asserting power can totally trigger us as well. And what happens when these threats are at play is that we start to lose our voice, and we shift into self-protective behaviors. And this shows up, we've seen with those reactions in different ways. Some of us might go into a defense mode or a fight mode, and others of us might go into trying to please or make people happy, or run away, completely avoid it, or completely freeze. And it's not necessarily helpful or healthy. So I want you to just give thought to a moment, in a moment, to a recent unhealthy conversation that you've had that might have triggered one or more of these threats. And just to think, I'm not going to ask you to share, but just to give thought to it, and what were your thoughts and feelings? What impact did this have on your body? These interactions have a tendency to impact us physically as well. And how did this impact on the conversation? Okay. Yeah, I think the power of just even a moment of self-reflection, and you guys, of course, can screen grab at any point if you'd like, just to have some of these questions for your team, or for anyone else that you want to share with. Cool. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk now a little bit about some practical tools that we can use to understand different levels of conversations, and how to move from level 1 to 2 and to 3. Okay, so I'm going to read through these levels briefly, and we'll talk through them. Please, as we're working through them, if you've got any questions, please do pop them in the chat, and we'll come to them at the end of the session. Okay, so firstly, we have level 1, which is very much about confirming what you know. It's about telling, and it's about asking. It's about exchanging information. There's limited listening that's happening, and generally categorized by a low level of trust. Okay, we often call this the tell, sell, yell syndrome, and it's very much associated with the command and control type of leadership models that were big in the, I don't know when, but apparently they were big at some point. They're obviously not working anymore. So those are very much considered old school models of managing and leading and interacting, really. So keeping people in the loop, this is about updating people, getting them information, and it's about directing people, processes, and it's all about the task and getting things done. It's often centered around reward and punishment, and it has the potential to push people into a state of fear and reluctance to change, and certainly to move into those protective behaviors. Often the questions that might get asked, if they are asked, are closed questions. So that's questions that elicit either a yes or a no response. And they're designed to confirm and protect what I believe to be true. So it's not about getting you or understanding the other. It's about, this is my way, this is what I believe, and this is what, this is how it's going to be. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next level, which is level 2. And that is really looking at advocating and inquiring. Okay, so now I'm starting to shift out of that initial perspective. And it's about defending what I know. There is an exchange of power, okay? So I am advocating for what I know and what I believe, and I am starting to inquire about what you believe, but mostly I'm inquiring because I want to convert you to what I believe, because what I believe is right. So I want to win you over to see things from my perspective. It's also limited listening, and there's conditional trust. So some trust, but it's conditional. If other people believe that you don't necessarily have their best interest at heart, so this can often be seen in the sales type of environments, but if people believe that there's an agenda here, they might close down and start to distrust the other person. It's very much categorized by being right, and some say an addiction to being right. Okay, so then we move on to our third level, which is very much about sharing and discovering, and this is ideally where we want to be. And it's non-judgmental. It's very much based on actively listening, on empowerment, on creating space for other people's thoughts, opinions, for their diversity. It's categorized by high trust, so we're not threatened by each other. We're creating space for multiple perspectives to exist, and holding what I like to call the and. It's not about either or, it's about how do we hold the and in the conversation. So the beauty of this is that it opens us up when we start to work in teams and do this type of co-creative work in organizations. Even, I mean, in any relationships or space, even in families, it's phenomenal when you start to see what can be created, because it really becomes much more than the sum of the parts. So each person and everything that they bring, all of their individual genius, and it will be different, because gosh, like homogeneity, is that the right word, is just so boring. But really creating diversity and spaces for people's differing thoughts and perspectives can create so much more than a one-sided view or just the parts. And it's kind of obvious, but we don't always get it right. So co-creating shared success and empowering everyone to be involved and to participate and actually asking people for their thoughts and their opinions. There's some, at the Hive, we run a facilitated session called Meetings That Matter. And this is about creating spaces and meetings where people can operate in this level 3 type of conversation. And what's possible is quite remarkable in terms of finding solutions and finding different ways of doing things. So it's about openness, it's about candor, it's about curiosity. The biggest word that comes out of this level 3 for me is curiosity, and operating from a space of, I don't know, but I'm going to learn and I'm open to learning. Okay, so we're going to move on now to look at what Judith E. Glasser calls her conversational dashboard. And this dashboard is a visual representation of what happens in the brain when we're engaging in different conversations. Okay, so on the left, you'll see protect behaviors, and on the right, you'll see partnering behaviors. So the left really represents what we've spoken about earlier, the primitive brain, where there's extreme fear and a lot of distrust. And the right represents the prefrontal cortex, and that's, as we mentioned, the executive brain, where our more advanced human capacities lie, and we're able to think strategically and innovatively and problem solve and come up with different ways of doing things. And it's also the space where we're operating at a very high level of emotional intelligence. So in the dashboard, you can see that on the left-hand side, we're operating at a level 1, defined by distrust. And there you can see there's resistance, there's skepticism. There might be people on the call here that are resisting what's coming up or what's being shared. There might be some skepticism around, oh, what's this stuff? In my field, I often get the comment, this is the fluffy stuff or the soft stuff. And I don't mind other people's views on these things, but I always find that it is often the stuff is not the soft stuff at all. This is the really hard stuff. Nonetheless, when we move towards inquiry and sharing our view, we become so much more open to other people's points of view. And, you know, as you can start to see, as it moves around this dashboard, we move into the wait and see. So I might be a bit on the fence, still kind of sussing it out, advocating for our own perspective. And then as we progress, we start to move on into level 3, where it becomes about sharing and discovering and experimenting. And like, okay, I don't know, but let's try. Let's figure this out. Let's work it out together and let's co-create. So it's about shifting from I to we. And at this point, we're really able to access the full functioning of our prefrontal cortex. So let's talk now a bit about our conversational blind spots. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you guys just to take 30 seconds to stand up, just roll your shoulders, maybe stretch or just turn around or whatever, just because we end up stuck behind our computers the whole day and in these Zoom sessions, and I just find it's can be very, it can get a bit much. Yeah, so just get a bit of movement going. Cool. And I'm going to have a sip of water. Cool. All right. So let's talk a bit about conversational blind spots, and I'm going to read through these, and then we're going to do a little bit of a poll again. So we have got, again, what Judith talks to is different blind spots that, and we all know what a blind spot it really is. We can't see what we don't know, or we don't know what we don't know. And becoming a little bit more aware of these things can really help us to identify where where the blockages might lie in the way that we're engaging with others. And often I find if we've got relationship challenges, there's often blind spots at play. And if we're not getting the results that we want from our interactions or from our relationships, then often this is the work that's needed. Okay, so blind spot 1, the question is, am I assuming that others think like me? So is there an assumption that when I say, I don't know, anything, when I say anything, that the other person gets what I'm saying, that our language is common language, that when I say, okay, let's you know, we're doing a team visioning session, for instance, and we sit down with the team and we speak, okay, cool, we want to be a successful team. What does that even mean? How often do we assume that when we speak about success, for instance, we're all on the same page? And it can be such a powerful exercise. In her book, Judith speaks about this exercise where you start to unpack language. Anyway, I'm sidetracking, but that's a little bit about that point. So are we assuming that other people see what we see, feel, and think the way that we think? And if we are, then we need to really start getting more curious about how other people view things, because it's not the case. The second blind spot is, do my feelings change my view of reality? So the failure to acknowledge that our fear and our levels of trust or distrust will actually impact how we see and how we interpret reality. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a bit. But it impacts. And if we're not acknowledging that, then we're going around believing that what our reality is our reality. And it's the truth. And yet what's going on beneath the iceberg, beneath the surface, impacts on how we make meaning and the conclusions that we come to in how we see reality. Okay, so blind spot number 3 is, am I too fearful to empathize? And it's an inability to stand in each other's shoes when we're fearful or when we're upset. Okay, it's just, I can't go there. And then blind spot 4 is, do I assume that I know because I remember what I heard? So do I assume that I know because I remember what I heard? So the assumption here is that we remember, we assume that we remember what others are saying, but we actually remember what we thought about what they're saying. It gets a little bit complicated here, but often that's what happens. And number 5 is, do I assume that because I'm listening, I actually know what you mean? And it's the assumption that the meaning resides in the speaker, when in fact, meaning resides in the listener. Okay. So it's all about curiosity here. And Lisa, if you're happy to run the second poll, that would be really great. And we're just going to ask you now to select which of the 5 blind spots you experience the most, or that resonates with you the most. So Lisa will enable that in just a moment. You should see it popping up on your screen, and there it is. So please, if you could take a moment just to give thought to those blind spots, and which of those kind of stand out for you as, yeah, impacting you the most, or being part of your default. Okay, great. So we're seeing some of the votes coming in. 40%. Yes, keep going. Thank you for your engagement with this. It's always fascinating, and it helps, yeah, me as well in my understanding of what's going on out there and how people are experiencing this, I suppose, this work. Yeah. Cool. We've got 75% having voted. We'll give it another few moments and you can put your vote in. All right. Okay, so yeah, Lisa, I think we can close the poll now. Thank you. So yeah, in a moment you should see the results. There we go, sharing the poll results. And we've got 44%, am I assuming others think like me? And then 40% as, do I assume that because I'm listening, I actually know what you mean? It's fascinating. And then how my feelings changing my view of reality, that's at 36%, 20% because do I assume I know because I remember what I heard, and 16%, am I too fearful to empathize? So that's fascinating. Thank you so much for participating in that. I'm going to close that screen now and we can continue on our journey. Cool. All right, so we're going to talk now a bit about how we bridge the gap between our intentions and our impact. And I alluded to it earlier when I said, if we're not seeing the results that we want to see from our relationship, and results is a strange word to use in that context, so I might change it to, if we're not experiencing the level of connection or quality in our relationships that we're hoping for, then it's important to look at this piece as well. So how often do our intentions align to the impact in the conversations that we're having? And how do we start to bridge the gap between our intention and our desired impact? So when we're engaging in conversations, it's important to consider, how do we cultivate trust? We want to cultivate that and actually build trust and reduce threats. Because what we know now is that the more trust there is, the more possibility for creative thinking and problem solving, and ultimately the results that we want. And the more threat there is, the more stress, the more we're triggered, the more we're shut down actually, and that impacts on everything else. So to get this right, we want to actually down-regulate fear, power, uncertainty, the need to be right, and groupthink. And groupthink is the need for us all. We all need to think the same way. So there's very little tolerance for a different perspective or a different point of view. So when we say down-regulate, it's a fancy word for, we need to reduce. So we need to firstly see whether this is happening and become more aware of it. And secondly, we need to actively shift our language to down-regulate and to reduce these components. And then we want to up-regulate our trust network. So when we're up-regulating transparency and the relationship, the focus on the relationship, understanding, shared success, when we're testing assumptions and truth-telling, this all intentionally builds what we're trying to achieve in those spaces. So transparency it's about reducing threats and fear by sharing more information, by asking for what you need, not assuming that other people understand you or know what you need. In times like these especially, it's about, as I said, moving from a space of who needs to know to who doesn't know, and how can I actively get people involved, get them information that they need. There's so much uncertainty at the moment, and the more real and open and transparent we can be, even if the news is bad news, the more we're going to create these healthy spaces. And the outcome is that there's going to be a lot more clarity. We're ensuring that others know what we know, and it really just changes the game. So the focus on transparency and openness, really, it changes things. And it's been interesting to see some organizations that have not done this particularly well, and how that's caused so much angst, especially in spaces where people are doing layoffs and all sorts of other things, for whether it's necessity or not, but people finding out a week before they're being retrenched and that kind of thing, which is just so damaging on so many levels, particularly to the company's brand. And yeah. Anyway, we're moving on to relationship, and that's about listening to connect and asking questions, determining what's important to the other person. I know what's important to me, but what's important to the other person, and having that kind of dialogue. So the outcome here is that we get so much more in sync, and we move from that fear state to a space of focusing on the relationship and beyond just the task. At this time, we're seeing quite a lot going on in the industry around the human, and this is we're in a crisis of humanity, and what does it mean to bring the human back into the center? And when we're ignoring that, it's problematic. And then understanding, checking. So Judith speaks about this principle called double clicking. And when you're on your laptop and you double click, it opens up the folder. It kind of digs one layer deeper into that folder or into that file or whatever the case might be, even if you're double clicking on a link. So her double clicking technique is actively inquiring and finding out what people mean when they say certain things so that we can understand each other better and get onto the same page. I see such breakdowns in relationships at I've got a client who I was working with at a founder's level, 2 founders working as partners who don't double click. So they're not understanding each other, and that's caused so much confusion and mistrust in the relationship. And just working on that and starting to understand just changes the game. So shared success is listening to co-create strategies for mutual success and understanding what does success look like in your mind, what does it look like in my mind, and how do we align those expectations? When we start to get aligned, we get so much more buy-in and participation. Okay, and then finally testing assumptions and truth-telling. And I think this really speaks to the importance of candor and keeping it real and just being straight with people. It doesn't mean that I need to be rude, or I can use some expletives here, but you get what I'm saying. It doesn't mean I need to do it in a way that's not kind or caring, but candor is a thing. We need to be real with each other. We need to say it how it is and reduce those reality gaps. So yeah, and I think that when we're not doing that, when we're not picking up on things and we're not giving each other real feedback, we're also really limiting the possibility of building those levels of trust. Okay. All right. So we're going to just talk now. I'm going to ask you guys just to reflect as we go. And this is just a little activity. So I'm going to read out phrases that are mixed up in different order, and what I want you to give thought to as I say the phrase is whether this ignites trust or distrust. So on the left we've got our distrust, and on the right we've got trust. So I'm going to say a couple of things, and is it something that makes you feel like trust or distrust? Okay, so first things first. Okay, let me go. So if I say yes, but, okay, is that trust or distrust? And you don't need to say or do anything, but just give it thought. Which column would you put it in? Okay, and then, okay, help me understand what led you to doing it that way. Okay, versus why did you do it that way? Okay, okay, so just do what you're told. Okay, and then yes, and say more about that. You don't need to know why. Okay, help me understand what's important about this. What would you recommend? You always mess up. Okay, let's talk about what's getting in your way. Nothing I've heard so far is worthwhile. what information do you need to help you with this? Okay, it's just my little activity to get you thinking about that. So we're going to quickly buzz through this now just to see, and this is really just to give us a sense, I think we know this instinctively, but just to give us a sense of how powerful language is. So yes, but, okay, yes, and say more about that. Okay, so why do you do it that way versus help me understand what led you to do it that way? Okay, just do as you're told. What would you recommend? Okay, don't need to know why. What information do you need to help you with this? Okay, always mess up. Let's talk about what's getting in the way. Okay, nothing I've heard so far is valuable versus help me understand what's important about this. Okay, so those are just some things to get us thinking about this. Cool. All right, I am mindful of time, and I know that we want to leave a little bit of space for some questions at the end, but I'm going to quickly breeze through this. And the ladder of conclusions is when there is an absence of communication or poor communication, it can lead us to making assumptions, even negative assumptions. Okay, so what we do is we'll often think of a past situation, we'll draw conclusions based on other stories or our own beliefs about that, and our insecurities then start to build up, and we respond from that place. So briefly, we're going to run through this. I'm not going to go into detail, but I will gladly share more information on this if any of you guys are interested. So we've got what is called the ladder of conclusions. Some of you guys might have come across the ladder of inference, and it's slightly different in that this one focuses, or that one focuses more on data, and this one focuses on our bioreactions. So when we have a conversation, we're subconsciously doing the following things, okay? The bioreactions are taking place at a chemical level. We've talked about the hormones that get released, trust or distrust networks being activated. We have feelings about that, okay? Friend or foe, how do I feel about this? I'm making a judgment. We start to put words to those feelings and making meaning of it, creating our own narrative. We then form beliefs around this. So we selectively add from past experiences, and we start to build on. That's a personal situation, and we start creating those beliefs. And then finally, we come to our own conclusions about it, okay? And often these are subjective conclusions. So we've blocked out the other person's perspective and view, and we may be seeing things entirely from our own perspective. So the tricky thing with this is that it starts to build up patterns and perceptions, and over time this can solidify. But the beauty that we found from neuroplasticity is that we know that we can shift all of this stuff. Our brains are malleable, and we can change these things. So the more aware we become of this, and the more granular we can get, the more we're able to actually shift this and very powerfully change how we engage and the impact of our conversations. So with that, I'm going to end the session, and I'm going to ask you to give thought to what is your pledge, and you don't need to pledge it out loud, but just to give thought to what do you want to do more of, what do you want to do less of, what do you want to do differently as we close out today, and what you take from today's session. And I'm going to open this up to some questions. If you guys have any, if we don't, we can, yeah, we've just got a few moments left. Then we can always get back to you after the session. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and thank you to ORT for just creating the space for these incredible opportunities to learn and engage and meet some wonderful people. And yeah, so let's have a look. I'm going to open up the chat now, and we can see if there are any questions. Okay, we've got some pledges coming through, which is wonderful. Listening more deeply, thank you, Shelley. Leadership, absolutely. Yes, in terms of the information, absolutely. We'll most certainly send through that information. Lisa, are you seeing any questions I might be missing?
No,
Okay.
haven't missed. There's one.
There's one.
Two.
Yeah.
One
Okay, great.
that says, how do you overcome the initial responses to get to collaboration?
Yes, 100%. Okay, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. That's from Natalie. Yes.
Dvorah,
Okay.
sorry. Do you want to just stop sharing?
Yes.
Dvorah, do you want to just stop sharing the just for a minute so we can?
There we go. Stop share.
Thanks.
Great. Cool. Yes, so maybe just to get to that that question from Natalie, let's just have a look where that was. So that initial response, and I'll definitely share more on this because, yeah, it might take a little bit more time to unpack, but I think it really is about mindfulness and coming back, so pausing, the power of the pause, and noticing what's coming up for me, noticing what's coming up in my body, my natural default reaction. And it is the more aware, so it's building that practice of awareness, I can then choose to respond differently rather than default to a specific response. And from that choice and giving thought to how I might shift my language, it creates a completely different type of conversation. So one of my favorite things to do is to actually push pause. And I've had many instances where I'm in a heated conversation or I'm just saying that this is not going where it should go. And I actually just stop and pause and I say, look, I need a minute. I just want to reflect. I'm sensing that this isn't the kind of conversation we want to be having. I need a minute just to regroup. And it's, I suppose, simple in a way, but it can be a very powerful way of just pausing and sometimes getting the other person to become more aware of how they're speaking or where the conversation is going. And sometimes it's about saying, or asking the question, is this the conversation we want to be having? Or what is the purpose of this conversation? Is there a different way that we can explore this? Okay, so that's a little bit about that, but I will share some more. And let me see if there's any other, we've got just a minute left, so maybe just a quick one. Yes.
One more from Shelley. How does one redirect the fight reaction to a more positive one?
Yeah, so thank you, Shell, for that. And yeah, so similarly to what I've shared now around the pause, the mindfulness, I think there are a lot of beautiful practices out there at the moment from, you know, different meditation, different types of mindfulness practices that help in this. And it's that create that more spaciousness. So the more space we have in these types of engagements and the more space we can create, the more able we will be to put a choice into the matter rather than a default response. I hope that kind of touches on that. And I think that's probably our time. So I'm going to hand over to, I think, either Brenna or Lisa to wrap up the session. But from my side, I just want to say thank you for joining, and it's been really great to just, I guess, explore this with you guys. Hope it's been valuable.
Thanks, Dvorah, and thank you to you just so much for your time that you've given to our organization, and just for discussing these issues that you've put so simply and given us lots to think about, and just how we can make small shifts in our communication that can make a huge difference to relationships. So thank you from all of us.
Absolute pleasure.
And to everybody else,
you a wonderful day.
And we look forward to seeing you next week. We have our next talk is one by Leslie Watercan and Dawn Jones. So please, if you can join us same time next week, that would be wonderful. Take care. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you. And I will get back to you. I'll get the chat and I will get back to you with any other questions or any other info that you'd like for those that would like more information.